I stayed up late nights to make sure he had everything he needed, juggling work and home without missing a beat. I listened to his endless stories and helped him with his homework, even when I was exhausted. I watched him grow, hoping my efforts would shape him into someone kind and strong. I celebrated every small victory with him, always putting his happiness first. Yet somewhere along the way, things started to change between us. The boy who once needed me began acting like he owned my life. The lines between love and control blurred, and I barely recognized the relationship we once had. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. The day my son tried to take over my life wasn't a slow, creeping nightmare. It hit me like a violent storm, ripping through every part of my existence. I remember the sharp edge of his voice cutting through the silence in my living room, the cold hardness in his eyes as he told me I no longer had the right to make decisions for myself. It felt like the ground beneath me cracked open and swallowed me whole, leaving me gasping for air in a world that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. I was stunned. How had this happened? How did the boy I raised, the same boy I sacrificed everything for, turn into a stranger who wanted to control me, dictate every step I took? The disbelief paralyzed me. I couldn't reconcile the caring child I once knew with the forceful, demanding man standing before me, acting as if he owned my life. For days, I wandered through the house like a ghost, lost and confused. The emotional weight was unbearable. I felt betrayed, hurt beyond words. How could he not see how hard I fought for us? How much I had given? The shock wasn't just in my mind. It gripped my heart with a mixture of sadness and anger. Every moment, I replayed memories. How I raised him, the sleepless nights, the endless sacrifices, trying to understand where it all went wrong. Looking back, I see how much of my life I poured into raising him. From the start, it was just the two of us. I was a single parent, juggling multiple jobs and trying to keep our small home warm and full of love. It wasn't easy, but I never let him feel the weight of my struggles. When he was little, I stayed up late after work, making sure he had his school projects done and dinner on the table. I celebrated every first step, every first word, every first day of school like they were miracles. I didn't have much, but I gave him all of me. My time, my energy, my hopes. I taught him honesty, kindness, and strength because I believed those were the gifts he needed most. Even when life hit us hard, I held us together, shielding him from the worst. Sometimes I wondered if it was enough, if all my efforts made a difference. But I never stopped trying. There were signs I missed. Subtle shifts in his tone, sharpness in his questions, demands about money and decisions. I told myself it was just growing pains, rebellion. But those cracks deepened. He started challenging my choices, pushing me away, questioning my judgment like I was no longer capable. I thought he was still my son, just testing boundaries. I was wrong. Then the day came when the locks on my front door were changed. My belongings boxed up. A letter from a lawyer stating he had power of attorney over me. The shock was a blow that left me breathless. The boy who once clung to me now wielded legal documents to strip me of my freedom. When I confronted him, pleading for understanding, his eyes were cold, his voice firm. He claimed he knew what was best for me now. The betrayal was devastating. I felt powerless, lost in a storm of pain and disbelief. What he didn't know was that years ago, I had quietly set aside a secret fortune, a safeguard for moments like this. It wasn't just money. It was my lifeline, my power. I had kept it hidden, fearing what might happen if it fell into the wrong hands. But now, it was my only hope. Though shaken, I felt a spark of determination. This wasn't the end. I still had control. With this hidden strength, I was ready to fight back and reclaim my life. This was just the beginning. At first, I didn't notice the small changes. They slipped in quietly, almost imperceptibly, like shadows lengthening at dusk. My son's laughter faded into silence more often than it used to. He stopped sharing the little details of his day, the jokes, the frustrations, the moments of wonder that once filled our home. Instead, his tone grew sharper, his words more clipped. He questioned things I had always done without hesitation, the way I managed the household, the friends I kept, even how I spent my money. I told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers push boundaries, I reasoned. He was finding his own way, asserting his independence, testing the limits of my patience and love. I reminded myself that I had been young once too. So I tried to be patient, to give him space, to support him from a distance. But beneath that surface, a storm was brewing, a storm I hadn't seen coming. He began making decisions without consulting me, changing plans, taking control of situations that had always been ours to navigate together. The little things started piling up. My mail left unopened, my phone calls ignored, my friends no longer welcomed in our home. At times, I felt like a visitor in my own life. And yet, I held on to hope. I clung to the memories of who he was, the boy who once needed me, who looked to me for comfort and guidance. I believed that love could heal any wound. But love wasn't enough. One evening, I found him in my study, rifling through my papers without permission. When I confronted him, he shrugged off my concerns, telling me he was just trying to help. That night, a cold realization settled in. He no longer saw me as his mother, but as an obstacle. Someone to be managed, controlled, and eventually, removed from the equation. The house, once warm and filled with laughter, grew cold and silent. The roles had reversed in a way I never anticipated. I was no longer the protector. I was the one being protected from. My heart broke a little more each day as I watched the son I raised slip further away, replaced by a stranger bent on taking over everything I held dear. The weight of his demands pressed down on me. I felt trapped in my own home, my own life. I began to doubt myself, my worth, my strength. The line between love and control blurred until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Then came the final blow. One morning, I returned home to find the locks changed. My belongings boxed up, shoved into storage bins in the garage. A letter from a lawyer lay on the kitchen table. He had obtained power of attorney. Without warning, without discussion, he had legally taken control of me. The shock was unbearable. I was blindsided by a betrayal so deep it left me reeling. The boy I had raised, the one I had sacrificed everything for, had turned against me with a coldness I couldn't comprehend. My home no longer felt like mine. My life, my choices, my freedom, all taken away in a single, devastating moment. I sat in the empty silence, trying to grasp the reality of what had happened. How could this be? How could the person I loved most become the source of my greatest pain? The ache in my chest was raw and relentless. I felt alone, powerless, and terrified for what came next. But beneath the hurt, a quiet voice inside me whispered that this was not the end. I had a secret, a hidden fortune I had quietly built over the years. It was more than money. It was my safety net, my weapon against despair. And with it, I knew I still had a chance to fight back. This was the moment I realized I had to be stronger than ever before. Not just for me, but for the life I still believed I deserved. This was the turning point. The moment he handed me the letter, I felt as if the ground had vanished beneath my feet. The paper was thin, yet the weight of its words pressed down on me like a stone. I held the document in my trembling hands, rereading the words again and again, hoping somehow they would change, that this nightmare wasn't real. But the sentence stared back at me with cruel finality. You have been granted power of attorney over my name. I looked up at my son, searching for any sign of the boy I had raised, the boy whose first words I cherished, whose scraped knees I had kissed better countless times. But the warmth I remembered was gone, replaced by something cold and distant. His eyes were hard, his expression unreadable. The person who had once clung to me in fear during thunderstorms was now the one stripping me of my autonomy with ruthless precision. How could you do this? My voice cracked under the weight of disbelief and pain. Without telling me? Without even asking? His answer was a chilling mix of certainty and finality. You're not capable of managing your own affairs anymore. I'm doing this for your own good. Those words pierced me deeper than any physical wound could. To be considered incapable by the person I had devoted my life to felt like a cruel betrayal, a dismissal of all the sacrifices I had made. I had worked every hour of every day to give him a better life. I had sacrificed sleep, comfort, and even my own happiness so he could thrive. And now, with this single act, he was telling me that I was weak, broken, and no longer able to decide what was best for myself. The following days were a blur of shock and heartache. The house, once a refuge filled with memories and love, became a prison. My phone calls were monitored, my bank accounts frozen, my every move questioned and controlled. Friends came by, their faces etched with sympathy, unsure whether to support me or avoid stirring the growing tension between us. I felt isolated and vulnerable, locked in a battle that wasn't just legal but deeply personal. Nights were the hardest. I lay awake, haunted by the echoes of laughter and warmth that once filled the rooms, now replaced by silence and cold indifference. I thought back to the boy who had clung to me for comfort after nightmares, who needed me to fix scraped knees and broken hearts. How had that boy become a man so willing to erase me from his life? I replayed every conversation, every missed warning sign. Had I been blind? Was there something I missed in his growing bitterness? The crushing weight of betrayal made my chest ache with a pain I could hardly bear. It wasn't just that he had taken legal control over me, it was the sense that he no longer cared, no longer loved me in the way I needed. Yet even in this dark abyss, I found a spark of defiance flickering within me. Years ago, I had quietly built a secret, a fortune hidden away from the world, even from my son. It was my safety net, my insurance against disaster. And now, it was my only hope. With trembling hands, I began to pull together the threads of a plan. I consulted lawyers who spoke in terms I barely understood, gathered documents, and reached out to trusted friends. Each step was heavy with emotion, as if I were reliving every betrayal and sacrifice all at once. But I was determined. I would not be erased. I would fight to reclaim my life and my dignity. The legal battles ahead were daunting. Every call, every meeting, every signature felt like a test of my strength. At times, I felt overwhelmed by exhaustion and doubt. But then I remembered why I fought, to protect not just myself, but the love I still believed could exist between my son and me. The cold distance in his eyes haunted me. I wanted to believe that beneath the anger and control, there was still the boy who needed his mother. I clung to that hope fiercely, even as the man before me seemed a stranger. As the weeks passed, my secret fortune gave me leverage I never imagined I'd need. It was more than money. It was a symbol of my resilience, a lifeline thrown into the storm. I began to regain some control, pushing back against the barriers he had set up, slowly reclaiming small freedoms. But this wasn't just about money or power. It was about love, trust, and the hope of healing a fractured bond. I wasn't ready to give up on him, or on myself. I steeled myself for the fight ahead. The road was uncertain, and the cost high. But I was ready. I had to be. Because even in betrayal, a mother's love never truly fades. The days after my son legally took control of my life blurred into an exhausting routine of frustration, fear, and quiet desperation. I felt suffocated by the invisible chains he'd wrapped around me, locked out of decisions, watched over like a prisoner in my own home. The man I once knew as my son had transformed into a gatekeeper, cold and unyielding, severing the ties of trust and love that I had nurtured for years. Every conversation with him was an emotional minefield, each interaction charged with tension and resentment. But beneath the surface of despair, a fragile ember of hope flickered inside me, one I had kindled long ago, when life was simpler but no less uncertain. Years before this nightmare began, when I was still juggling multiple jobs as a single mother, I made a quiet, unspoken promise to myself. No matter what happened, I would never be powerless. I would prepare for the worst, shield myself and my son from the harshest blows life might deliver. It was then I started building my secret. The fortune that no one, not even him, knew about. I didn't stash it under a mattress or in some obvious place. Instead, It was woven into the fabric of my life like a hidden thread. Small, careful investments made in quiet moments of relief between hectic days. Bank accounts opened under alternate names, properties purchased in the shadows, stocks and bonds accumulating slowly but surely. It was my lifeline, my fortress built brick by brick over decades. Now, when everything felt lost, that hidden wealth was my anchor. I could almost hear its quiet promise. You are not alone. You have power. I reached out to an old friend and trusted lawyer, someone who had once helped me navigate the complexities of my early years as a parent and had become a quiet guardian of my secrets. We met in a small cafe, a place far from prying eyes, where I laid out the devastating betrayal and the fortress I'd built in silence. She listened carefully, her eyes sharp and understanding. "This changes everything," she said, tracing the lines of my secret accounts and assets. "With this, we can fight back. We can take back control, not just of your finances, but your life." Her words felt like a balm and a call to arms. Together, we began piecing together a strategy, a roadmap out of the darkness. We would challenge the power of attorney, contest his claims, and regain my autonomy. But more than that, I knew I had to confront the emotional chasm between us, if only to remind him of who I was beneath this legal and familial storm. The road was brutal. Each phone call with my son was laced with cold formality or biting accusation. I was constantly reminded of the rift that had grown too wide to bridge with simple words. But I clung to memories, the lullabies I sang when he was small, the scraped knees I kissed, the dreams I once shared with him under starlit skies. Behind every legal document filed and every meeting with my lawyer, I was fighting for something deeper than money or control. I was fighting for dignity, for love, for the mother-son bond that had been strained to its breaking point. My secret fortune gave me a power I never thought I'd need but was fiercely grateful to have. It funded expert legal counsel, paid for private investigations into the legitimacy of his claims, and gave me the confidence to stand firm against his attempts to silence me. At times, exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole. The emotional toll was immense. I battled not only my son's betrayal but the self-doubt that crept in during quiet moments. Was this battle worth the pain? Could we ever heal? Yet, with every small victory, each successful motion in court, every blocked attempt to undermine me, I felt the scales begin to tip. More than anything, I learned that empowerment is never just about resources. It is about reclaiming your voice when it has been silenced, standing tall when you have been pushed down, and refusing to let anyone else write your story. As weeks turned into months, the hidden fortune became more than a secret stash. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the life I had built and refused to lose. It reminded me that while my son might have tried to take over my life, he had not taken my spirit. I was no longer the powerless mother he tried to control. I was a woman rising from betrayal, armed with courage, strength, and a secret I had guarded fiercely. The battle was far from over. But for the first time since the storm broke, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And with hope I could fight on. The fight to reclaim my life was the hardest battle I had ever faced. But every step forward, every small victory, felt like a piece of myself returning, a quiet reclaiming of the power my son had tried to steal. With a hidden fortune behind me, I was no longer trapped by his legal grip or the shadow he had cast over my existence. I began by working closely with my lawyer, who helped me navigate the complicated maze of the legal system. We challenged the power of attorney, presenting evidence that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. The courtroom became an arena where years of sacrifice, love, and resilience were laid bare. Each hearing was exhausting, but I learned to speak firmly and clearly for the first time in months, refusing to be silenced or diminished. Outside the courtroom, I also started rebuilding the bridges my son's actions had burned. I reached out to family and old friends, those I had been pushed away from during his takeover. Their support reminded me that I was not alone, that my identity was more than what he had tried to define it as. Slowly, I stepped back into the world, rediscovering the joy and freedom I feared lost forever. The hardest part was facing my son directly. The man before me was not the child I had raised. He was bitter, guarded, and filled with resentment. But beneath that, I saw traces of the boy who once looked to me with trust and love. I realized that the pain between us was tangled with fear and misunderstanding. It was clear that his need to control came from a place of uncertainty, not just about me, but about himself. I tried to reach him not with anger or blame, but with openness. It wasn't easy. There were tears, harsh words, and moments when it seemed the gap between us would never close. But I held on to hope, believing that the love which had shaped us both could still heal the wounds. Through this struggle, I discovered something deeper about myself. Betrayal had shattered my world, but it hadn't destroyed me. The hidden fortune I once thought of as a safety net became a symbol of my resilience and independence. More importantly, I found strength in my voice, my courage, and my refusal to be defined by someone else's control. In the end, I reclaimed not just my legal rights, but my identity as a mother, a woman, and a survivor. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of betrayal would always remain, but I was no longer powerless. I was empowered by my past, my secrets, and the fierce love that had never truly left me. And as I looked toward the future, I knew this was not just a story of loss and betrayal, but of hope, strength, and the unbreakable bonds that, even when tested, could still be mended.